The war was over. The conch shells had fallen silent. The arrows had stopped raining. Kurukshetra had finally ceased burning. But what if the Mahabharat did not end with Duryodhana's death? For the deadliest blow was not struck by a mace, it was struck in a heart. Inside the royal camp, a blind king stood trembling, his arms stretched forward, waiting. His face looked broken, but his heart was not calm. It was filled with something far more dangerous than grief, rage. Dhritarashtra had lost everything, 100 sons, his dynasty, his pride. And now, only one name burned inside him like fire, Bhima. The man who had crushed his bloodline. When Yudhishthira heard of Dhritarashtra's arrival, he immediately went to meet him with his brothers, Shri Krishna and Draupadi. They were met by the cries of grieving women who accused the Pandavas of destroying their families. Bearing this sorrow silently, the Pandavas entered the camp with humility. Yudhishthira bowed first, like a son before an elder. Dhritarashtra touched him, and his hands trembled. Then he spoke in a voice that sounded like a curse disguised as love. He asked where Bhima was, and demanded that he be brought forward so he could embrace the one who had killed his 100 sons. Everyone froze, for the blind king was not asking for a blessing, he was preparing for something terrible. It is said that Dhritarashtra possessed the strength of 10,000 elephants. In that moment, he intended to crush Bhima's bones in his arms and end the war with one final act of revenge. Bhima stepped forward, but before he could take another step, Shri Krishna moved, not loudly, not dramatically, just one calm motion, a small signal. In that instant, a metallic statue was pushed forward, an iron figure, a perfect imitation of Bhima's body. Dhritarashtra seized it, pulled it to his chest, and embraced it with the force of madness. The iron body shattered, pieces falling like broken weapons. The king's chest bruised from the effort, and it is said he even vomited blood. Yet he did not stop. He continued crushing until nothing remained but twisted iron and dust. When his rage faded, he wept, crying, "Ha, Bhima! Ha, Bhima!" believing he had finally killed him. Seeing that Dhritarashtra's fury had subsided and fear had taken its place, Krishna revealed the truth, that Bhima was unharmed and that only an iron statue, made earlier by Duryodhana, had been destroyed. Foreseeing Dhritarashtra's blind wrath, Krishna had kept Bhima away, knowing that no living being could have survived such a grip. Krishna explained that grief for his sons had shaken Dhritarashtra's sense of righteousness and driven him toward an unworthy act. Everything that had occurred, Krishna said, was meant to restore balance and peace. He urged the king not to sink further into sorrow, reminding him that this devastation was the result of his own failures, despite his learning in the Vedas, the scriptures, the Puranas, and the laws of kingship. Repeated warnings from Bhishma, Dronacharya, Vidur, Sanjay, and even Krishna himself had all been ignored. Those who reject wise counsel, Krishna said, must later bear the consequences when disaster arrives. This calamity arose from Dhritarashtra's own actions, not from Bhima's. Bhima had merely fulfilled justice by avenging the humiliation of Draupadi, a chain of events that began with Duryodhana's jealousy. Krishna reminded Dhritarashtra that it was he who had driven the innocent Pandavas from their rightful kingdom. And the truth became terrifyingly clear. The war had ended on the battlefield, but the war within human hearts continued. The story now shifted, from kings to mothers, from warriors to widows, from glory to grief. Stri Parva was not about war, but about its cost. The women of the Kuru dynasty, long accustomed to palace life, stepped into the open world of loss. Their appearance bore the marks of sorrow, shaped entirely by grief. Sage Vyasa, sensing the anger rising in Gandhari's heart toward the Pandavas, reminded her to restrain her wrath and recall her own words spoken in righteousness. Before going to battle, Duryodhana had sought her blessings, and each time she had declared that victory always belongs to dharma. Sage Vyasa reminded her that these were truths spoken from her own wisdom. He emphasized that Gandhari was compassionate by nature and wished well for all beings. The Pandavas had emerged victorious, and Yudhishthira was undeniably devoted to dharma. Vyasa urged her to return to forgiveness, abandon anger, and remain true to her declaration that where dharma stands, victory follows. Gandhari clarified that she bore no hatred toward the Pandavas and desired no harm to them. Her anguish arose solely from the unbearable grief of losing her sons. The destruction of the Kauravas, she admitted, was the consequence of the crimes of Duryodhana, Shakuni, Karna, and Dushasana. Blinded by pride, they had brought ruin upon themselves through war. Yet Gandhari admitted that her anger had flared when Bhima struck Duryodhana below the waist during the mace fight, an act she saw as a violation of righteous warfare. She also condemned Bhima's drinking of Dushasana's blood, calling it cruel and unworthy of a noble warrior. Bhima, filled with fear and humility, explained that he had acted only to save his own life, for her mighty son could not be slain by any warrior in a righteous duel. He reminded her that Duryodhana had earlier defeated King Yudhishthira through deceit, subjected Draupadi to humiliation in the royal assembly, and inflicted years of exile and suffering upon the Pandavas. Even in the mace fight, Bhima feared that Duryodhana would kill him, and it was this fear alone that drove him to act as he did. Drinking Dushasana's blood, Bhima explained that the blood never touched his lips and that even Karna knew this. He had only smeared his hands with it to fulfill a vow taken in fury when Dushasana dragged Draupadi by her hair in the dice hall, a vow he believed could not be broken without losing his warrior honor. Gandhari then lamented that she and Dhritarashtra, now old and blind, had been left without a single surviving son. Sparing even one, she said, would have eased her suffering. Overcome by grief and anger, Gandhari summoned Yudhishthira. He approached trembling, accepted full responsibility for the destruction caused by the war, declared himself worthy of punishment, and renounced all desire for life, kingdom, or wealth. Gandhari remained silent, breathing heavily. As Yudhishthira was about to bow and fall at her feet, her restrained gaze, passing through the blindfold, fell upon his toes and scorched his nails. Witnessing this, the other Pandavas withdrew in fear. Gandhari's anger then subsided, and she comforted them with maternal affection. The Pandavas next met Kunti, who, seeing her sons after many years, broke down upon witnessing their wounds. The sight of Draupadi, bereaved and childless, deepened her grief. Draupadi mourned Abhimanyu and her sons, questioning the worth of a kingdom gained at such cost. Kunti consoled her and led her to Gandhari. Gandhari urged Kunti and Draupadi to restrain their sorrow, reminding them that her own suffering was immeasurable. She accepted the destruction of her lineage as the working of time and destiny, as Vidur had foretold. Sage Vyasa then blessed Gandhari with divine vision so she could behold the battlefield and the fate of her sons. Blindfolded for life, Gandhari walked with Kunti beside her, Draupadi behind, and countless women following like a river of sorrow toward Kurukshetra. What she saw was an ocean of death, blood-soaked earth, broken chariots, fallen elephants and horses, severed limbs and scattered heads. Rivers of blood flowed across the field. Jackals roamed, vultures circled, and smoke hung heavy over what had become a vast graveyard. The women of the Kuru and Panchal clans collapsed upon seeing their dead, fathers, husbands, sons, and brothers. Some fainted, others beat their chests or rolled in the dust. Widowed, exhausted, and helpless, they wandered without awareness. Their cries filled the land with unbearable sorrow. Gandhari saw Duryodhan lying lifeless, once surrounded by splendor and fanned by royal luxury, now lying beneath the shadow of vultures. She collapsed beside him, recalling how he had sought her blessings before the war. She beheld her many sons fallen, her lineage destroyed. She saw Bhishma upon his bed of arrows, Dronacharya surrounded by grieving Kripi, Karna fallen like an extinguished flame, Jayadratha slain despite divine boons, Shakuni killed by Sahadev, and countless kings of many lands reduced to dust. She saw Abhimanyu lying fallen, yet undimmed in radiance. Uttara, overcome with grief, held his head in her lap, brushing away the dust, unable to accept his death. Nearby, Dushala, stunned by sorrow, moved across the battlefield in search of her husband's severed head, still unable to accept that she had become a widow. Seeing her daughter in this state, Gandhari's heart was filled with sorrow. Witnessing this devastation, Gandhari turned toward Krishna and accused him of possessing the power to prevent the war, yet allowing it to unfold. The Pandavas, protected by him, could never be destroyed, while her sons were lost the moment peace was abandoned. From the force of her long penance, Gandhari pronounced a curse. Just as the women of the Kuru lineage now wept in devastation, so too would the women of Krishna's own clan one day mourn. In 36 years, the Yadav race would destroy itself through internal conflict, and Krishna himself would meet his end alone. Krishna received her words without resistance. He accepted the curse as destined, explaining that the fall of his own clan was already ordained for the balance of the earth. No god, human, or demon could bring about that end except himself, and thus the Yadavs would perish through their own internal strife. He reminded Gandhari that this devastation had arisen from years of nurtured adharma, and that its burden could not be placed upon him alone. Hearing this, even the Pandavas were unsettled, realizing that though the war had ended at Kurukshetra, destiny had not yet completed its course. After this, Dhritarashtra questioned Yudhishthira about the scale of destruction in the war and the destiny that awaited those who had died. Yudhishthira stated that in the war, 1,066,020,000 brave soldiers were slain. Besides these, 14,000 warriors were unaccounted for, and the fate of another 10,165 soldiers remained unknown. Yudhishthira explained that those warriors who offered their lives joyfully in battle attained heavenly worlds such as Indralok. Those who fought without joy, believing death to be inevitable, went to the regions of the Gandharvas. Those who begged for life or fled the battlefield and were killed reached the Yaksh worlds. But those great warriors who, though disarmed and helpless, never turned their backs out of shame and loyalty to the warrior's code, and were cut down while standing firm, attained Brahmalok without doubt. All others who died on the battlefield were destined to be reborn in Uttar Kuru. Yudhishthira knew these truths, for during a past pilgrimage he had the good fortune to meet the divine sage Lomash. From him, he had received this knowledge, and even before that, through the power of the yoga of knowledge, he had attained divine vision. Yudhishthira immediately ordered that funeral rites be performed for all, without distinction between friend and foe. Under his command, the priests and elders arranged the cremation of kings, warriors, and unknown soldiers alike, using whatever resources were available. For those warriors who had died without anyone to claim them, Vidur ensured that they too were cremated with dignity. That night, Kurukshetra resounded with Vedic chants and the cries of grieving women. Later, on the banks of the Ganga, the royal women and the Pandavas offered water for the departed. At that sacred moment, Kunti confessed a truth that had burned within her for years and could no longer remain hidden. She revealed that the warrior believed to be a charioteer's son, the one defeated by Arjun, the commander of Duryodhana's armies, the one born with divine armor and earrings, was not a stranger at all. Karna was their elder brother, born from her womb through the grace of Suryadev. She asked her sons to offer water to him not as an enemy, but as their own blood. Hearing his mother's painful revelation, the Pandavas were overwhelmed with sorrow for Karna and stood in deep distress. King Yudhishthira, shaken by grief, turned to Kunti and said that Karna was as deep and vast as the ocean, and that no warrior except Arjun could withstand the storm of his arrows. He asked how such a man, born of divine origin as the son of Suryadev, could have been concealed for so long, hidden as though fire were covered with cloth. He lamented that by keeping this truth secret, Kunti had brought destruction upon them all. Yudhishthira declared that just as the Pandavas had relied upon Arjuna's strength, the Kauravas had relied entirely upon Karna. He cried out that this hidden truth had led to their complete ruin. He said that the sorrow he now felt for Karna's death far surpassed all the sorrow of the war. He confessed that his heart burned only with grief for Karna, as though set aflame. He said that had this truth been known earlier, nothing on earth or even in heaven would have been beyond their reach, and the terrible destruction that wiped out the Kuru lineage would never have occurred. Dharmaraj Yudhishthira, weeping uncontrollably, finally offered water for Karna. At that moment, all the women present broke down in loud cries of grief. Moved by brotherly love, Yudhishthira then summoned Karna's wives and performed his final rites according to sacred law. With folded hands, he acknowledged his unknowing sin in causing the death of his elder brother and sought release from any anger they might still hold in their hearts. Carrying a weight heavier than victory itself, Yudhishthira stepped out of the Ganga and returned to the shore with his brothers, carrying a sorrow that victory could not ease. The true meaning of the Stri Parva becomes clear toward the end of the Mahabharat. There were no real winners in this war. Every side lost something that could never be recovered. The Stri Parva is not painful because of violence or bloodshed. It is painful because it shows what remains after the fighting stops. It reveals broken families, unanswered guilt, and grief that no victory can ease. Here, we do not witness heroes celebrating success. We witness human beings collapsing under the weight of what they have done and what they have lost. A blind king attempts murder in the name of love. A man of wisdom explains that life itself is a well filled with suffering. A mother, crushed by loss, directs her grief even toward God. Another mother reveals a truth that arrives too late. This is why the Stri Parva does not belong only to history. Its sorrow continues to echo through time. Even today, wars may end on paper, but their consequences live on. Trauma outlasts treaties. Hatred often survives peace. And the deepest destruction does not always occur on the battlefield, it occurs within the human heart. This leaves us with reflections that have no easy answers. They leave us only with ourselves. If we stood in Gandhari's place, carrying a mother's unbearable grief, what would we have done? If we were Yudhishthira, learning the truth about Karna after the war had ended, how would our heart have responded? And if we were Kunti, holding a secret meant to protect yet destined to wound, what choice would we have made? The Mahabharat does not frame its characters for approval or blame. It compels self-reflection. And the Stri Parva is where that reflection becomes most uncomfortable. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment. Your support motivates us to create more such videos. Subscribe and continue to inspire and stay inspired.